The Real Estate Wise Guys Podcast.
What is up, my friends? Welcome to the second episode of the Real Estate Wise Guys. I am your host, Zach Barger. I'm here with my co-host and the coolest vegan I know, the boss man himself, Sean Weiss. We are ready to jump into it this week. We are going to hit the numbers for July that just came out with ABOR, and then we're going to jump into some different strategies that we can use for affordability in this new balanced market that we're experiencing. Without further ado, Sean, let's jump into the numbers, my man.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the one that I look at first, which is our closed sales. We are down 35% year over year, which is a significant drop. We haven't seen anything like that in a decade probably, and we're trending that way right now. We can sum it up to buyer demand has diminished greatly. The good thing is the median sales price is continuing to increase. So we saw an 11% increase on that. We are now at $633 on the median sales price in the city of Austin. With the buyer demand falling, that's obviously that closed sales indication. We're seeing more listings. The listings sit on the market longer, which is kind of building up our inventory, our supply of available homes to 2.4 months, which is a huge increase of where we were at in the middle of last year. But that is still considered a seller's market. We're headed towards 3.5, maybe even 4 months of inventory in the city of Austin, which is much more of a balanced market. And that's something that a lot of agents and buyers should be welcoming with open arms, because it's been tough for a buyer in this market these last few years, and it's been really tough, working with buyers and helping them get them into homes just because of the competition has been so tough.
Without a doubt, yeah. The two big takeaways I had from the numbers was pretty surprised by the median home price being as high as it was at $633, which is up 11% over last year. I figured that we would definitely be up, but up 11% with the amount of sales decreasing was kind of surprising. But it's a good indication that prices are going to remain strong more than likely throughout this year and into next year. We're not going to see huge price growth from this point forward. I think we'll probably end the year somewhere around 600K, but prices remain strong, and we'll likely see appreciation in the year somewhere between 5 to 10% at the end of the year.
Yeah, and to touch on that, a reminder, you may see a lot of statistics about price decline, price reductions, all of that. When they're talking about those numbers, a lot of times to get headlines or to make headlines, they're using month over month drops. So just to put that in perspective, in May, our median sales price was $667. June was $615. So that was a drop of $50,000, $52,000 month to month. We don't look at that number because that's too little data. We're going to look year over year. And we saw it go up to $633. Year over year, that was an 11% jump. In August, last year was $540,000. So that is what we're comparing, August of 2022. We want to look how we did, or, what the price movement was between last August and this August. We don't really care how it's moving from June or July to now. We want to see that year over year growth. Homeownership is a long-term investment, a long-term asset that people hold on to. So we're not really interested in the month-to-month change. It's the year over year. So we were at $540,000 last August. We're at $633 this month. So if we did see a drop in price from July to August, which is possible and maybe even likely, the likelihood that it goes all the way down to 540 is pretty much like completely out of the question. So we're still going to see growth in August, September, October, November, December. Those were all in the mid fives where we were last year. And like Zach said, we're thinking we're going to end up in around low sixes. So we're going to see price growth pretty much through the rest of the year, and it's going to be a healthy return, outperforming most markets pre-pandemic. So that's something as a homeowner you can feel good about, and as a buyer, buying at the top and seeing that is not something that I would be too concerned with in the short term.
For sure. I had a client this week ask if they should wait to purchase a home because they were convinced that we're going to get back to pre-pandemic prices. Do you think that is a possibility?
No. The short answer is no. I mean, we've seen a lot of growth in the last 2 years. So, I mean, we were seeing 30, 40%, in some markets and, in some submarkets in Austin. To go back to those numbers, there would have to be, that'd be pretty catastrophic. Do we see some price decline in some markets? For sure. And I think that's much more likely once you get outside of kind of central Austin and even just city of Austin in general, and you get to a little bit more what were rural areas that are kind of redeveloping, and the Elgin and Taylor and Manor and those areas where there's kind of an influx in new builds. When that's the majority of the inventory, you're going to see a little bit more volatility in pricing. But if you're in Austin, then yeah, that movement is going to be significantly less and definitely less volatile for sure.
For sure. Just to reinforce that point, we're not going to get back to pre-pandemic prices.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be, our median home price was in the 400s. I think it's unlikely that our median home price will get below 600, definitely not below 575 would be my guess, besides the end of the year, by the end of the year. And we'll continue to see solid price growth moving forward in my mind. There's still demand out there. It's kind of been set to the side right now because of interest rates, but I think as we start to stabilize more in the 4 to 7% range, where it becomes more of a norm to have a 5 or 6% interest rate, and that's been there for a while, we're going to have more buyers entering the market again. And that price growth isn't going to be like the 28% we saw last year, but it'll probably be in that range of 5 to 10% over the next few years.
Yeah, and I think like there's definitely parts of Austin that will probably see some, lower price growth than that. We may see zero. There's been talks that we could see negative or depreciation in some areas. As Austin as a whole, I don't know if that's going to be like, I'm not getting behind that yet. The metro area, maybe, just because there's so many other markets that are going to feed into those numbers. But the moral of that story is anyone who's buying today is not going to be selling next year. I mean, you shouldn't be going into it with that plan. Obviously, there's certain circumstances that may dictate that, but if you're buying in late 2022 or early 2023, you're likely going to own that home a minimum of 3 years. That should be your goal anyway. And by that, and if we're going to see this kind of plateau of pricing for the next, 6 to 18 months, that shouldn't affect, the purchasing. That's not why people are buying homes to live. It's not a short-term thing, and it has the utility of being your home and where you sleep and, all of that. So that's another component, that pricing is moving in a direction that's favorable to buyers, but this fear of you're going to be upside down by $100,000 is, very unlikely at this point. There's still a lot of demand in Austin, and relatively speaking, our supply is pretty low still. So that's another reminder. We're seeing a lot more homes on the market, but that's coming from basically no homes on the market that we've seen.
Most definitely. The other big takeaway I had from the numbers is that we are in a more balanced market and likely will be moving forward in the next few months to even a year or two from now. For sellers, it's important that you price your home appropriately now. In the past, 2 years, honestly, as long as you were in the right ballpark, you're probably going to sell your home pretty quickly, and your marketing wasn't nearly as important. Like, it was important. There were definitely tens of thousands of dollars left on the table if you didn't do things appropriately and you didn't use the appropriate strategies. But now it's heightened. It's more important how you price your home, how you market your home if you're going to sell it, and sell it at top dollar.
Yeah, and a big thing that the conversation I'm having with my sellers now is merchandising the home to get it ready for the market. It's the things that we really hadn't seen in a lot of homes these last few years. It's landscaping, it's making some minor updates, even whether it's flooring or light fixtures, countertops, updating a powder bath, something like that. Those are difference makers now, because you have to stand out, because when the buyers are going to look at the houses now, they're looking at 4, 6, 7 homes to compare it to, where last year they weren't. They were either making offers on most of the homes they saw because there were so few of them, or there was literally nothing else on the market in this little neighborhood that they wanted to be in, so they would look at the one, they would make an offer. Now, and the other big thing is we are pricing our listings not based on sold comps. Those sold comps are getting pretty irrelevant quickly. And historically what we do is we look at, when a home sold, in the last, you would go back 3 or 6 months. And even now, if you go back 2 weeks, it closed 2 weeks ago. Well, that means it went under contract 45 days ago and was listed, prior to that. So that data gets old pretty quickly. Right now, yeah, it's an indication of like where the market was in the very immediate short term. But what's more important is looking at what else is on the market, what's active, who's your competition when you're going to price yours. You want to make sure that you're not more expensive than anybody else, that you're and if you are more expensive than the other active comps, are you nicer than all the other active comps? And if you're priced the same as others, and those homes are more updated, bigger, nicer, whatever that it may be, you have to be priced below them because buyers are going to see that. They have options now. They're going to see more homes, and that's going to factor in their decision. Price right now is the number one thing that we are kind of focusing on with our sellers, because that frankly was not a focus these last few years. You could pretty much say, hey, seller, what do you want to sell your home for? They would pick a number. We could probably agree to it. We could justify it in some way with comps. They'd get that price, if not over or pretty close to it, where now it's, hey, we got to be a little bit more realistic and strategic in this. Otherwise, you will sit on the market for 60 days.
For sure. We have to look at the overall picture and evaluate where we are compared to other homes in that sub-market, right? We want to make sure that we're positioning ourselves where we're the most attractive, the best value in that neighborhood. And that's a combination of how the home is presented and its price. You can't, just because you have something that's the same square footage, if it's not presented the same, doesn't mean you can have that same price. We have to look at all the variables and make sure that we're positioning it appropriately to help you get that maximum exposure, which is going to get you that house under contract and the at the highest value possible for you.
Yeah, and one other thing I was going to touch on is you can be the highest price listing in the neighborhood, and someone's got to be the most expensive. You just have to be the best house in the neighborhood. I mean, that's really what it is. So you kind of have to know what your product is and what you're comparing yourself to. And if yours is completely updated and has a new roof and new HVAC, and you've invested quite a bit of money in it, and you kind of can go toe to toe with these other homes it is a better product, then you can be the most expensive. And the buyers will recognize that and pay that. Buyers are still paying list price. I think the preliminary numbers for August are saying we're netting about like 98.5% of list price. So people are still getting really close to their list price, but those list prices have to be accurate. I mean, that's kind of the moral of the story there.
For sure. And I've seen on my listing over this last week, the phone call volume has definitely increased too. It feels like we're getting a little bit more momentum with some demand. So it's not going to be as crazy competitive as it has been the last couple of years, but if it's positioned right, there's still plenty of buyers out there ready to swoop their homes.
And we had an agent in our office. She just got a house under contract with a buyer, and it actually had multiple offers, and that's just an indication they priced it that way. They priced it well, they presented it well, it generated enough activity. And some people their listings are on the market for 60 days, not getting any showings. And it's that, yes, there's better houses than others, but if you price it right, you can still generate multiple offers, or generate an offer in that first weekend.
For sure. All right, let's move on to buyers in this market. So obviously, we both have experienced the struggle that it's been the last couple of years representing buyer clients in this market, especially if they're not strapped with cash. So overall, how does a buyer navigate this more balanced market? Is it a benefit for them?
Yeah, I mean, the terminology of a seller's market and a buyer's market has been thrown around. We're not really in a buyer's market yet, statistically speaking. It just feels that way because of where we were. But it is way more comfortable for a buyer right now. Interest rates obviously are not as good as they were, so there may be some discomfort there. But in terms of the pace of which this market's moving, being able to get pre-qualified with a lender, meet with your agent, go look at a few homes, visit some open house, kind of get a grasp on what's out there and what the market's like, and then being able to just go look at homes. You can go look at homes on a Saturday, wait to make a decision. Maybe you come back to it on Monday or Tuesday, and you see some other stuff come on the market, and you want to go out again the next weekend. You can do that, and those other homes may still be on the market to compare. Stuff is sitting on the market a few weeks, so you do have a little bit decision-making time, but also just more options to see. And most buyers that are in this market now weren't in the market last year. Like that's how it works. If you were in the market last year, hopefully you bought. And if you didn't, then you may be in this case where you're looking in both. But so you don't really have anything to compare to if you're getting into it now, but it is very refreshing for agents representing buyers that like, this is the way it should be. It's way more comfortable for us too, where we're not feeling like we're, dragging someone through a crowded bar to get somewhere, and that you don't know where you're going. And, you just kind of have to blind faith of like, all right, then I trust you. We're going to do whatever I say you're going to do. But you get a little bit more time. You can ask those questions. There's opportunity to negotiate on the contract that weren't there. But the biggest thing for me is talking to buyers that this is a much more comfortable marketplace to be in as a buyer, even with higher interest rates. If you had to pick and choose, like, yes, the carrying costs are going to be a little bit higher than they were last year with these interest rates, but when you're getting under contract and you're negotiating and you're getting into that home as a buyer in this market, you feel way better about it than you did last year. I mean, I had buyers that they go through the process and they would close, And it's not really, it's almost a sense of relief that they finally got to the finish line, but it's not this like joy of like, oh, this is my, I'm super excited about my house. Cause a lot of times they didn't even really get a picket. Like they just got lucky on the offer that they put in. And, they finally got to the point to where they were tired of losing. So they, they push the envelope to finally win.
I mean, we both had multiple scenarios where you had buyers that you were putting in offers with every single weekend. And when you finally get that one that breaks through, it's almost like, oh, now what do we do type thing. It wasn't really excitement because we just got beat up so much by this market, and it was hard to avoid that.
Yeah. So that's definitely a big positive about the shift that this market is going, is that it is not technically a buyer's market, but it certainly feels like it. And as a buyer coming in this market, that's what it'll feel like. There's still a negotiating. There's kind of the tug of war on the contract terms and that sort of thing. Sellers, statistically speaking, there's not a ton of inventory, so they can be a little bit more stubborn and they can negotiate hard as well. But there's opportunity right now for buyers for sure.
I've had people tell me that they're waiting for interest rates to come down before they buy. One, do you think interest rates are going to drop? And two, should they wait for that if you do think it's going to happen?
No one knows where interest rates are going. I'm not going to take the bait on that. My crystal ball is not that accurate. I think right now we've seen interest rates move up. The Fed meeting is I think next week. The expectation is that there's going to be another increase. That doesn't directly affect mortgage rates. It does in kind of a ancillary way. A lot of lenders have already kind of priced in that movement. So we're getting close to 6% again. We got down back close to 5% in earlier in August. I think the expectation is that they're going to get worse before they get better. And then I think the question is how much worse and how much better. And you talk to lenders, you talk to people that study this stuff every day, and they don't know. I mean, even in a less volatile market, they don't really know. If a common lender philosophy is, if you like the rate on paper that I'm showing you today, then lock it in. Don't try to predict what's going to happen. If you're comfortable with this today, let's lock it in. So where rates are going, I think it's anyone's guess. I've heard all ends of the spectrum that we're going to be back in the 4s next year, that we can hit 7%, that they're going to stay where they're at. Those are the three options, and I don't know which one I like them to, get back into the 4s from a kind of a momentum standpoint, but if they get too far down to the 3s, that's where you get this kind of lopsided market. You have way more buyers than you have sellers, and it's difficult. But I think getting into the 4s would also open up some opportunity for sellers, because right now all these sellers that have homes with mortgages in the 3s, low 3s, they're not interested in selling and buying something else because interest rates are in the 5s. So they're going to sit tight, and I think that is going to be kind of a gridlock until the sellers can justify that rate change. And in terms of waiting, common phrase is marry the house, date the rate. So don't get too hung up on the rate. Rates can change. There's also a bunch of products out there that can change that rate, whether it be an adjustable rate mortgage, buying down, points. Like there's a bunch of different things that you can do to change that. And refinance is always an option. It's not a guarantee. If rates continue to go up, then you're obviously not going to refi. But if rates go up,
and you waited.
And if you buy now and rates go up and you lose the opportunity to refi to a lower rate, well, you have a lower rate than what everyone else is getting at that time. So that's an advantage. And if they do go down, then you can refi in 2 to 3 years if it makes sense to do so. But generally speaking, we're seeing inflation numbers in over 8%, and mortgage rates are at mid 5s. Like it does make sense right now to borrow money at, it's cheaper to borrow money than it is to hold cash with the inflation that we're seeing. So my simplest philosophy on buying is buy when you're ready. So if you're comfortable with the rate, and you're comfortable with the down payment, and you're comfortable with the price, then you're ready. If there's stuff that's uneasy about that, have conversation with us to see if we can, get you comfortable, but don't feel the pressure of I got to buy before X. It's got to be when you're ready. And most buyers kind of know when that is, financially and just, kind of mentally, they're prepared to do that.
For sure. I want just to comment on that. The reality is that 2% and 3% interest rates for mortgages, that's not common. Like that's abnormal historically. The fact that we've been there the last few years is part of why we had such a crazy market over the past few years. But that's far from a normal interest rate. Like historically, something between 4 and 7% is much more common. So I do think it's unlikely that we get below 4 anytime soon. It could be decades before we got back to that. We don't know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the expectation if rates do drop, they're not going to drop to those
Right.
levels. They're going to drop to the fours. I
Right.
think that's kind of the expectation.
And the other component of that is if they did drop, I don't think they'll get to 2 or 3s, but if they did get back into the 4%, that demand is going to come flying back and it's going to be crazy competitive again. So if you're waiting for that to happen, yeah, you'll have a lower interest rate, but prices are more than likely going to be higher than where they are now, and you're back into the multiple offers, crazy competitive situation
Yeah.
if we do see that drop. So look at the variables that we have now, and we'll talk about strategies now about how we can handle both monthly affordability and reducing your entry costs to get you in a situation that's comfortable. But waiting, if you're wanting to purchase a house for something like the prices to really go down or interest rates to really go down, I don't believe is a good strategy, because if interest rates go down, it's going to be crazy competitive. I think it's unlikely that we see any significant price drops. So you're going to be sitting on the sidelines and not be building equity during that time frame.
Right. And I think, I mean, that's essentially what you're describing is trying to time the market. And there's not very many success stories of people timing the market on purpose. It's very difficult to do. There's so many variables that play into that. So like we said, when you're ready and you feel ready, or you're kind of getting close to that point, have that conversation with your agent and ask those questions. Make sure you do have your ducks in a row and you're prepared. And at the end of the day, if you're comfortable with your monthly payment and kind of what your rent amount would be if it was it being a mortgage and what those carrying costs are, then and you have the liquidity to be able to get into a home with your kind of entry cost, then you're probably ready. The other variable of that too, from the movement of the market, is a market that is definitely going to be increasing over the next 12 to 36 months is the rental market. Rents are going up. I think the forecast for Austin is over 20% year over year increase on rents. So if you are renting, that payment's definitely going to go up. And that's going to start to make a little bit more sense when you're looking at your monthly rental amount compared to a mortgage. Yeah, it requires a little some upfront money, but then you're locking in that payment for, as long as you live in the home.
For sure. Why do you think rent rates will increase?
Well, a number of reasons. When there's less people buying, there's more people renting. And specifically in the city of Austin, we saw, because we've seen such a big increase in home values, property tax values went up significantly. That hits landlords the hardest because they don't have any protection from that, like homestead exemptions, which you get if you're a primary owner or occupant of your home.
For sure.
So the landlords, it's an investment just like anything else, treated like a business. They're just going to pass that cost down to the renter. And when you have, like I said, when you have a diminishing supply of buyers, they have to live somewhere. So they're going to be renting, and that's just going to increase the demand on the rental side.
For sure. Just to give a real life example on that, one of my rental properties I purchased at 209, and this year, I bought it 2 years ago. This year, the tax assessment was $440. So my monthly payment basically increased by $450 on the tax side because that assessment went so high. So obviously my numbers on that changed dramatically, and that's why a lot of landlords are having to increase their rent rates, what they're offering the house for, because their costs went up so significantly with the increases in taxes over the last couple of years.
Yeah. No, and it's a real thing, and we're going to see it, all over the city and outside of as Austin as well. To kind of get into, if a buyer's ready and they're kind of, preparing to make that decision to purchase a home, the first kind of barrier there is their entry cost. Can you talk a little bit about, what buyers can do in this market to minimize their entry costs into buying a home?
Yeah, for sure. So with the market being as crazy as it was the last couple of years, when we had clients come to us that were pre-approved for $500,000, looking to put 10% down, in 2016, that would have been an amazing buyer client. But over the last couple of years, it's been super difficult to get that client into a home because we weren't able to cover an appraisal gap because of all the multiple offer situations. But now, because we are in a more balanced market, we can look at houses that don't have multiple offers, and we can get you into a house with lower down payment options. So there's a lot of different low down payment options across the different loan products. On a conventional loan, you can go as low as 3% down. On an FHA loan, you can go as low as 3.5%. And then VA, which is for veterans, there's a 0% down option. So you can have no down payment on that, as well as USDA, which really doesn't apply to us in Austin. It's a rural-based or location-based, but it's primarily in rural locations, but it doesn't really apply to our market. But moral of the story, there are different loan products now that we can get an offer accepted with that over the last couple of years we haven't been able to use. So we can get into a house at 5%, 3%, 3.5% down, whatever it may be, in some cases even 0% down. Now the other component of what your entry costs include are your closing costs. Generally speaking, your closing costs are going to range from 2 to 4% of the sales price, depending on the terms of the loan and the contract. But we can do things now when we're negotiating called negotiating for seller concession, which are seller paid closing costs. In the past, this was difficult to do because the sellers had so much leverage in the negotiations that we weren't going to get an offer accepted if we try to build that into a contract. But now in a more balanced market, if this house has been sitting there for 30 plus days and they want to get this house under contract, we can bring an offer to the sellers that's going to include seller concessions. We can use those seller concessions for a multitude of things, but one is just reducing your total entry costs. So if you're someone out there that's looking to purchase a home, and your biggest barrier to that for most people it is, especially if you're looking to purchase your first home, is the amount of cash you have. You don't have that 20% or that 10% even to put down, but you have, you feel comfortable putting 5 or 6% down, and you have money set aside to cover a rainy day scenario. We can get you into a loan, into a house at a lower down payment. We can get you buy a $400,000 house and only have to bring somewhere in the ballpark of 20 grand, even lower in some cases, to the table, and be able to actually be a homeowner with lower down payment. Have you experienced any of that?
The most common one that that I've kind of factored in for my clients is not necessarily closing costs or from a down payment perspective, but improvements needed in the home. So it's seller's concession is the most common one. But if you're, my client's got 20% to put down and they want to maintain that to, meet the conforming guidelines of a conventional loan, closing costs are not an issue, but it needs a new roof or needs, new HVAC system, or maybe it's just updates they want to do. They have a $25,000 budget that they want to spend on, or a bid that they want to spend on updating the home. We can negotiate, we can save some money with a seller's concession, whether it be 10 grand or 15 grand, whatever it may be, increase the sales price. So their monthly payment's hardly changing, but it's basically a way to roll in that cost, because you have entry costs to purchase the home, but then if you have plans to spend money once you get in the home immediately on updates, well, that's entry cost really as well, if you're planning to spend those immediately. So you can roll some of that stuff into the loan by this kind of method that we're talking about, where you're increasing the contract price and basically getting a concession from the seller. So the seller makes no difference. They're essentially getting, they're walking away from the closing table with essentially the same amount of money, but the buyer got to purchase the home and bring less money to the table for closing costs, which keeps that money in the bank account so they can then go do those improvements. And that's something that's probably the most common one that I see with my clients. And it's never anything like really significant because there is a limit on those concessions, but $10,000 is, that'll cover the cost of, a re-roof or an HVAC, or, if you're updating flooring or something like that, like that's a pretty healthy budget for stuff like that. So that's probably the most common one that I use with my clients.
Yeah, for sure. A couple other options too that are available now that haven't been in a while are we can use grant programs. Grant programs are basically down payment assistance. There's a lot of requirements that go into it as far as your income and credit score and things along those lines. There's income limits on it that you can, if you make too much, you can't apply for it. But these are all things when you sit down with your lender, you can find out if you are approved for, like if you can get a grant program. Obviously, interest rates are going to be a little bit higher when you're using programs like that. But in 2017 and 2018, back before it got really crazy, I had multiple clients get into a house where they actually got their earnest money back at closing. It's pretty sweet when you're buying a house, you're getting the keys and you're getting a check. That hasn't been the case over the last few years. And again, when we talk about those things, there's a lot of variables involved with them. We want to make sure that we're putting you in the best situation possible when we look at all those things. Sometimes a grant program is the best option for you, but other times it's going to impact your monthly affordability so much that it doesn't make sense. But the only way we can really determine that is have you sit down with the lender and look at all your variables to determine what's your best framework for this search.
Yeah, and most people don't really understand before they get in the process of what their monthly payment is going to be and what their purchase price budget is, because a lot of times like you can if you have a price budget, that's only because you know what that equates to on a monthly basis. If you don't know, those calculations, it almost doesn't matter if it's $500,000 or $700,000 or $1 million. What matters is, what does that monthly payment look like? And the only real way to do that is to kind of go through those different scenarios and sit down with a lender, look at your assets and the liquidity that you have for down payment and closing cost, income, which is going to determine what your limit is on the loan amount, and then kind of back into those numbers from there. And obviously a lender is going to give you those parameters of like, hey, this is where you're at. You can buy X purchase price with X% down, and you can deviate from that. Obviously you can go lower. You can put a little bit, if you have the ability to put more money down, then you can put more money down. You're not locked in, but it certainly helps set the tone for, okay, this is what I'm able to do. These are my options. And sometimes it's, you determine what that is. Zac will send you properties that meet that criteria. Like, I don't want to live in those areas, so I'm going to save up a little bit more money. I'm going to look in a different area. Or you just really want to own a home, so you're willing to go outside of those geographic areas that you were originally interested in to kind of meet that budget. For sure. And that's something that your agent's going to help you with when navigating different areas and prices and that sort of thing.
For sure. When we're working with clients, the first thing we're going to have y'all do is meet with the lender, and then we're going to build that framework based on what you feel comfortable with from a total entry cost standpoint and your monthly payment standpoint. That's where we're going to try to create that search from, to make sure we're operating it within a criteria that you feel comfortable with. What you're approved for is almost an irrelevant number if it doesn't fit within that criteria that you feel comfortable with on a monthly basis, as well as an entry entry cost component.
Yeah.
With that being said, what are some strategies that buyers can employ to reduce their monthly costs?
So probably the most common one is that's going to affect your monthly payment is your interest rate. So obviously interest rates going up where they're at. There's opportunity to buy that rate down. It's something that every lender offers. They're called discount points, but basically it's a calculation of a percentage of the loan amount will reduce your interest rate by a certain amount. And the general rule of thumb is every 1% of the loan in a fee or a discount point paid reduces your interest rate by 1/4 point. So on a $500,000 loan, you spend $5,000, your rate is reduced 25 basis points or 1/4 point. So if you were at 5.5, now it's 5.25. What I always do with my clients is we sit down, and it's a very simple calculation, but you determine, okay, what's the point cost and what's the rate reduction, and how that, and what that total amount is. So in my hypothetical, it's $5,000. And if your payment is being reduced by $100, that's 50 months of payments to break even. That probably doesn't make sense. My general rule of thumb is if you break even in between 36 and 48 months, probably makes sense to do. If it's anything past, 48 months or even a little over 3.5 years, it probably makes sense just to keep that $5,000 in your bank account, pay $100 more a month, and there's a likelihood that you're either going to refi or you're going to sell that home before you hit that year 4 or 5 mark anyway. So that's kind of my rule of thumb, is do that quick math of what your that rate buy down fee is and how much does it save you and when's the break even point. And there's some cases where you're breaking even, at 18 months or 2 years, and that's almost always makes sense to do that. And you can pay 2 points to get it down 1/2 point. You can pay, sometimes 2 points gets it down 3/4 point. So it can make a real big difference, especially depending on, what that loan amount is. That's a big one. And then the second one that is not really talked about a whole lot is the property tax rate variance, like within Austin. So there's, when you're in Central Austin, you're going to pay 2.2% for your property tax rate. That's essentially a tax that the Travis County and others, but it's summed up to about 2.2%. They tax you on the value of your home every year. So if you own a $500,000 house and they're taxing you 2%, that's $10,000. There's other parts of town that are 2.5%, almost 3%. And then there's parts of town that are 1.6, 1.7%. Well, if it's a $500,000 house or an $800,000 house, that's a lot of money in a change of nothing being different other than your tax rate. So if that is something that you're, and that's money you don't get back. So it's not something that's going towards your mortgage payment. It's something that does increase year over year. As the values of the homes go up, your tax bill is going to go up. Rates change every year in addition to the tax values. So sometimes tax rates come down, and we're seeing a decrease this year, but with a significant increase in value. So likely people are going to see an increase in their tax bill. But if that is something that you want, that you pay attention to, or you're interested in, then we can look at some of those lower taxing areas. And that would be, you get outside of town in, Wimberley, for example, Dripping Springs, both of those, I know, Sunset Valley, Westlake, all of those have lower tax rates than, Central Austin. There's some areas like Eastern Park, and you get, in Manor, and you get outside of, or even like San Marcos and Columbia, they have higher tax rates than the city of Austin and Travis County. So that's one that we can pay attention to and help you. I mean, that can significantly decrease your monthly carry on that.
Yeah, that's literally hundreds of dollars a month.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between a 1.8 interest rate and a 3%, or not interest rate, but property tax rate and a 3% tax rate, that's significant on your monthly basis. For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else I missed on that?
No, a strategy that some of my clients have used and I actually use personally from a monthly affordability standpoint is called house hacking. So the traditional idea of house hacking is that you would buy like a duplex or a triplex, live in one of the sections, and rent out the other two to either cover all of your mortgage or a large portion of it. Another variant that I actually employed when I bought my first house, with a 3.5% down FHA loan, so I had $20K out of pocket. And then I brought on 2 roommates and rented out rooms. So I was paying, my portion of the mortgage was roughly $1,000 a month. And then after a few years, I was able to sell that house, take the profit from that, and turn it into 2 additional investment properties from that. So it's a great way to build wealth. Obviously, there's the convenient factor of living with someone else isn't ideal, but from a wealth building standpoint, it's one of the best ways to grow wealth quickly, is getting into a house, start building equity, and have other people pay for a portion of that. And you can also do things such as Airbnb or couch surfing, where there's different ways that you can rent out rooms for a shorter amount of time, but still be bringing in cash. So that having your name on a house, but having the title of a house and being able to rent out different rooms is a great way to have other people start building your wealth.
Yeah, just a way to generate income on that property and offset some of those carrying costs for sure. Airbnb is a good one, even if it's one of those things whether you're renting it out for a it's difficult to get a short-term rental permit in Austin for type 2, but if it's type 1, meaning it's your primary residence and you want to rent it out, a handful of weekends a year when you're out of town, or you go stay at a friend's house or whatever, during those big weekends, ACL or South by, whatever that may be, you can rent out your house for 3 or 4 nights. You generate some money from that, and that's going to help reduce your carrying costs throughout the course of the year, help pay that property tax bill and some of that, whether you have a higher interest rate or whatever it may be, you can help offset that cost, and that's something if you can't do unless you're a homeowner.
For sure. One other thing I wanted to ask you, as far as monthly affordability goes, starting to see a lot more ARMs used, adjustable rate mortgages. We know that term back from the 2008 days, 2009 days of being a naughty word, right? Something that we don't want to touch. Do you think people should look into using ARMs, and should they be concerned about it if they do?
Yeah, it's definitely something that you should consider. Talking with a lender, subject matter experts is kind of my, that's always my philosophy. So talk to a lender, see what those options are, see what the kind of the terms are of that. Adjustable rate mortgage is pretty broad. There's a lot of different products out there that fit under that umbrella. A lot of times, you'll hear 5-1 ARMs, 7-1 ARMs, 10-1 ARMs. That first number is how long that rate is locked in before it adjusts. So if you have a 7-1 ARM and it doesn't adjust for 7 years, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to own that home after 7 years. You're likely going to sell before then. Adjustable rates are not, there is the exposure there that it could increase, but another thing to look at is most of those ARMs have a cap on how much they can increase, both annually and altogether. So again, that's kind of the fine print of those loans. But if you have, 511, that means after 5 years it can increase, but it can't increase more than a full point every year. So that's what that second number is. And then there's an indication written in that loan of it can't get more than 4 points over the original rate. So you're kind of obviously 5 to 9% or whatever would be significant, but there's protections in there. The main thing that I look at is what's the likelihood that you're going to own it longer than that initial rate term. So if it's a 5-1 ARM, that's there's a decent chance you're going to own it after 5 years, so it's a little bit higher risk, but that also means that entry rate, that first rate, is going to be lower. It's a higher risk, but it's they're going to give you the benefit of having that lower rate. And don't think the other option too, and this is when the home that I'm in now, when we initially purchased it, it was an adjustable rate mortgage. It was a 7.1, and I think we refinanced in year 4, and the rate came down. So you can always refinance out of these too. And I kind of had that in the back of my mind of like, see where rates are going to be at year 7, but rates were very favorable around year 4, and that's when I decided to refi.
For sure. I actually just locked on a 7.1 for one of my investment properties that be buying here hopefully this month.
Yeah.
Theoretically this month. We'll see if it's done.
What was the rate difference between that and kind of the conventional rate?
Almost 1.5%. So
wow.
We locked at 5.1 and we were going to be at 6.6 on an investment loan. So
got it.
So significant difference.
Yeah. I mean, that's a difference maker in whether you're probably buying an investment property or not, because the whole 1.5 swing is probably going to make it, not it's not going to cash flow. You're going to be, negative cash flow probably. So, definitely look at that, talk to the lenders and talk to your lender and ask that question of, hey, what are my options here? If I did adjustable, if I did conventional, if I did FHA, and kind of let them kind of lay out the different examples, ask for their opinion, what they think is a good idea and best, because that's their world. But don't necessarily rule those out just because of the adjustable is kind of a scary term. Yeah.
The regulations are a lot different than they were back then as well. They're a much safer product. But at the end of the day, it's what your plan is, what your goals are, and make sure that it fits within that. Because you do have additional options. But if you think you'll be selling the house in 7 years, then it's a very safe thing to do, and it's also you have the option of refining if it presents itself. So a lot of different options there, but another great way to reduce your monthly costs to allow you to get a more comfortable monthly payment.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, what should we do from here? If I'm a buyer,
call Zac. or any of our agents on our team. We've got a strong team of agents, all experienced in this market, are coming off the 2 craziest years ever working with buyers. So the biggest thing that I keep telling people is ask questions, reach out. Just see if it's an option. If the market is scary, ask us those questions. See if we can help with that. We're not going to answer the phone and convince you to buy a home. That's not our job. It's to educate you, make sure you feel comfortable kind of coming into this market. And most of us have a lot of experience with a bunch of resources where we can help answer those questions and make you feel better, even if it's just give you a better understanding of it. And that understanding tells you, hey, I want to wait till next spring to buy. But reach out, ask questions. That's my advice.
For sure. Part of why we're covering this is we're hopeful that you're aware of more options now. Like if you've been on the fence on possibly making a move, but just didn't think you had enough cash up front to do it, or you were concerned about monthly affordability, hopefully this kind of opened your eyes to some different options that you have now. At the end of the day, really, if you're interested at all, you just need to give us a call. We'll sit down with you, put together a game plan, and determine whether or not now is a good time, if we have a good framework to move forward with, or if we don't, and we need to take some additional action to get you in a position that you feel comfortable with. But we can't know that until we sit down and we look at all your variables and meet with the lender and create a game plan.
Cool.
All right, my friends. Well, we appreciate everybody listening. If you like what you listen, we'd greatly appreciate you all to leave a review as well as subscribe. Tell your friends about it. Help us grow our listener base. And you're also able to find our contact information in the show notes. So if you have any questions or interested in finding out more about how we can help you achieve your goals for real estate, feel free to reach out, and we would love to do so.
Thank you, guys. See you next time.